Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Maria, the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association, for our 2023 Season of Sustainability and Renewable Energy presentations. Maria is a 501c3 nonprofit grassroots organization made up of volunteers dedicated to educating and engaging the public and advocating for renewable energy production, energy efficiency, and sustainable living. We encourage you to listen, ask questions, experiment with what you learn, and help others become more sustainable. I'm Phil Jones, tonight's host. This is our sixth meeting for this year. We will be back the last Tuesday of every month through October to continue our presentations on renewable energy and sustainable living. We post presentations and registration links on our website at www.themorea.org, where you can also add yourself to our mailing list to receive our email reminders. Tonight, we are presenting Bringing Permaculture to Your Home and Garden. Before we get started, we would like to share online renewable energy and sustainable living coming attractions that are live on the last Tuesday of each month. July 25th, our next session will be Can the U.S. Get to Net Zero Emissions? Examining the visionary climate provisions of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act and their implementation challenges. In August, we explore birds and bird safety with Dr. Daniel Clem, ornithologist and professor of biology at Muhlenberg College. September 26th, we will be meeting in person at an open house at the Stonehouse Group in Bethlehem, where we will learn about its Stonehouse Group's successes bringing sustainable building to many of our buildings and campuses. And now for tonight's presentation. During the presentation, please mute your microphones. You can enter questions into the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will ask your chat questions to the presenter. Tonight's presentation will be recorded and is recorded. And now, Diana Ortiz-Burns will introduce you to bringing permaculture to your home and garden.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. You're actually about to see something a little bit different. So my co-speaker, co-presenter, Dan Jones, had a surgery, had something pop up today. So we had proactively had filmed this presentation the night before. So you're actually about to see a recording. Not for the entire presentation, we did a majority of it, but there'll be a live presentation towards the end. I'll pick up where we left off. And then we will be both available for open discussion and Q&A at the end. So apologies again if there's some duplication. I gave that intro last night as well. So looking forward to a discussion at the end and hope you enjoy our talk.
Thank you, Diana.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diana Burns, and I'm here with Dan Jones, and we will be presenting together Permaculture. We are actually trying something new for both of us. We're recording in advance because Dan had a surgery pop up, which was nice of him to be flexible and try out recording. So we're recording together, and then we will do some portion together live tonight, the night when we're going to be playing this for everyone. So we look forward to presenting this topic to you. I'll kind of introduce things quick. So we will do an introduction to each of us. You can get to know us a little bit better. And then Dan will cover, and we'll kind of go back and forth and talk through kind of what is permaculture, what is not permaculture, and then cover the key kind of tenets that make permaculture what it is, and how to apply it to your own situation, factors to consider when applying it. And then we will use some different case studies to kind of illustrate the points of how you can apply it and navigate your own situation and goals. And then we will open it up for discussion to everyone. So I will turn it over to Dan to introduce himself.
Well, thank you very much, Diana. As Diana said, my name is Dan Jones. I'm the operations manager for Eden Design Group. We're based in Laytonsville, Maryland, which is just outside of Gaithersburg. We specialize on outdoor living spaces. We design pools and patios and spas, landscape, Basically, anything that you would, as our tagline says, envision your Eden, we can create for you. A little bit about my experience. I started in the landscape industry back in 2001. I kind of fell into it as a means of needing some extra income as I had adopted my ex-wife's first daughter, and then we had one on our way. And I did pretty well with it as a side job and found that I enjoyed it. And every job that I'd finished, I would usually get anywhere from 2 to 4 referrals. And eventually I was able to segue out of my day job and into this. Over time, I've managed to learn a lot. I've gone through a lot of classes, and I've really benefited from the knowledge of other people in this industry who were very kind to me to take the time and answer my questions and help me understand how things work and encourage me to think of out of the box ways to solve issues. And another person who I really have to thank is my late dad, who, when realizing that this was the profession that I had now chosen for myself, actually invested in a ton of encyclopedias. We all remember what those were, I'm sure, for me, that dealt with anything that you could imagine in land and hardscaping. So I had a wealth of knowledge. This was when the internet was still kind of young. Nowadays, I mean, if you're not sure what to do, you can YouTube it, you can Google it. I think you might even be able to ask ChatGPT how to do something and it'll give you the answers. But back then, it was a lot of talking and learning and researching. So we've come a long way, and but that's the basis of my experience.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, thanks. A little bit of background about me. So I'm director of facilities at Meridian International Center. We're a 4-acre historic campus in Washington, D.C., Northwest D.C., and we are a premier event venue. We do a whole lot of things there. We're really a place that brings people together around shared global issues. Climate change being one of the things we bring people around to talk through and try and find solutions together, diplomacy, as well as leadership and training opportunities. But some of my background history, I've been in facilities management and operations management for over 10 years, as well as sustainability. And that's really kind of the foundation of my education and background and how I approach my profession and the work that I do. And sustainability is really important to facilities management. And even when it comes to capital projects and construction projects, which is what I also oversee, because there's a lot of strategy involved. I think as all of us realize as homeowners or supporting the organizations we're in, it's often a lot of money to do the right thing, and it can be kind of confusing at times, or you want to be impatient, you want to go down a certain path. Sustainability really just helps to look at things holistically and then see things from a system standpoint. And I've really enjoyed applying kind of those skills at Meridian, because it's certainly a very unique challenge. That's something I'll get to in a moment when Dan kind of gives background to our story and how we had met, because I definitely needed some help. I needed a partner at Meridian that I could trust, because we had some serious challenges there. Been there about 2 years now. Still have challenges there, but we're chipping away at it. And that's come from strategy and building a good rapport with each other and really thinking strategically and outside the box to approach the challenges there and do it in the right way, in a way that's going to improve the environment at Meridian. So, Dan, you want to talk a little bit about how we had met and some of the work we did together?
Sure. It was the worst day in Diana's life, right? Isn't that how you would preface it?
Probably.
Joshua Seek is the owner of the company I work for, Eden Design Group, and he had gotten to know Diana and Meridian through some contacts. And when I'd come on as operations manager, he had expressed to me that this was one of the properties that he hoped to build a long and lasting relationship with. because there were unique challenges that Josh and Diana had both seen when they had initially met, that he felt we could help them answer, but we could also learn some new things on the way as we were helping them. He felt, and I do too, confident that even if there was something we weren't sure how to tackle right away, with the depth and breadth of the team that we have working for us, we could come up with the solutions that they need. So my initial meeting with Diana was with Josh and her at her offices, and we spent probably about an hour and a half talking, getting to know each other, getting to know some of the unique challenges for Meridian. And I fell in love with the place almost immediately. I'm a big history buff, so the history behind the building, the fact that it was the architect who had handled that had also done, I think it was the Jefferson Memorial. Is that correct, Diana?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then also the Meridian House itself, I think, is the house that is tied into a portion of the Watergate scandal, as far as having been owned by the Graham family at some point, or someone associated with it. So, I mean, there's a lot of history there, and both buildings have unique differences between them, yet because they're part of the same campus now, they need to be tied in together. And so I just love the challenges and the century-old landscaping and architecture that's there, and having to work with that and keep that in place, you know, as really a part of the American story. So that's my
Thanks,
intro of how
Dan.
we met. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. And here's a picture of Meridian in full swing. Because again, we're a private event venue, and I think it's just, again, good to know, we're going to hit on it later, that there's always going to be different goals and parameters we're all trying to work into when we're designing our landscapes, how we live. We're all going to define those things differently. Doesn't change the goals that we have, which is to grow our sustainability program at Meridian and continue to use the assets we have, like a greenhouse, and expand on those things, get into composting, edible gardens, all of those kinds of things. But we still are first and foremost a place that people host high-end premier events. We have weddings every Saturday. We have a space that truly has to embody the essence of resilience. We need to be able to turn over spaces and curate spaces every day. And we operate 7 days a week, pretty much. So you can see some of the things we have to maintain. You can see the annuals, the flowers, and different plantings we do. And then you actually are seeing some unique trees we have on the campus. They're European linden trees, which are imported from overseas. Long time ago, you can't do that anymore. But they're there. So we have just really interesting environment and ecosystem on the campus itself. And we have to be able to manage all of those things. And many of those individuals are actually standing on what is partially a green roof. Wasn't necessarily designed that way, but that's some of the challenges and things that Dan and I have been working together on, is water management and waterproofing of the houses. We're not creating other problems, pest management, things of that nature. So very unique and interesting space that we have to navigate. So they are homes too, by the way. It's multiple houses. So we're pretty much building these little gardens and nooks around they're large houses, but they're houses. So, and then here's some other examples of the work we've done together. We rotate flowers 3 times a year, just to keep things kind of fresh. Because again, we're always having people taking pictures, but we really always try to be thoughtful about what is seasonal, what is around, what can we kind of keep in place for a season or two, couple of years. I think even on the picture on the right is Creeping Jenny that we had in for, I think, the 2 years, and it held up well. We kept it there. So we always try to keep things in and rotate and move things into the greenhouse when we need to, and just really keep as much as we can in place as we can. So anything you want to add, Dan?
Well, yeah, I mean, the creeping Jenny really, I just have to say, surprises me. Having been in Florida for a number of years and then coming up here, how well it had stayed, like you said, for we're going on almost 2 years now. That it's been in there, and even when we did this last rotation, we were really lucky that some of it we were still able to keep, and we only had to bring in a small amount. And then I was really happy to find that Spanish portulaca purslane would actually grow up here, so we were able to intersperse some of the creeping Jenny with that. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. I just went off on a tangent about creeping Jenny. I'm a plant
No,
geek.
it's great.
What can
It's
I say?
great. I really like it too. It's a great plant. So I'm sure I would think it definitely could survive in Pennsylvania as well.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll hop on in, but at least kind of have the background set. So yeah, Dan,
Yep.
take it away.
Take it away. So, what is permaculture? Is the question that we're going to ask, and it's really it's funny because when Diana had reached out to me to initially discuss this, she had asked me, do I know what permaculture is? And I had basically asked her, well, it really depends on who you're asking. Permaculture is, I'm not going to say new, but it's a combination of multiple practices and mindsets. And so the term itself is still not fully defined. You could ask one person what permaculture is, and you would probably get an entirely different answer than what I'm going to talk about tonight, and Diana's going to talk about tonight. And we are going for the broad definition of what permaculture is. Some people will be very specific. They may think it's one thing or another. So, let's start with some of the definitions that we have for permaculture. So definition one here is that it's a design system that aims to create sustainable and self-sufficient human habitats by integrating agriculture, ecology, and social systems while minimizing environmental impact. And I think there's a really good definition here. It's, we're looking for ways that we can make the hard structures, the man-made structures, to work with the natural structures that we would find out in the world. And of course, most natural structures on a property aren't natural because they've been landscaped that way. However, the way that they grow, the way that they feed, the way they receive their nutrients is natural. And so we need to find ways to have them work together with, the hard structures that we humans put in. You got anything to add to that one there, Diana? Or
I think I just like the term design system. And we'll talk about that later too, about how having a plan and looking at things kind of holistically before moving forward in any one path is important. And that's not to like paralyze anyone in doing something they want to do. But it does just encourage this holistic design philosophy, and using though an actual system to kind of balance all these different pieces that are important, like agriculture, the ecology, and then mentioning the social systems piece as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit too as a philosophy. So yeah.
Okay. Yep. So definition two, we have an approach to land management that seeks to mimic the patterns and relationships found in natural ecosystems, promoting biodiversity, resilience, and productivity. And again, we see here that we're talking about the patterns and relationships found in the natural ecosystem. So even when an office space or a place like the Meridian that is two actual houses that have been turned into a campus, these natural ecosystems are man-made, but they're still acting within the laws of nature. And so they've got to be treated and respected as such. Definition three involves designing and maintaining productive landscapes that optimize the use of resources, reduce waste, and foster regenerative practices such as organic farming and water conservation. And I like this one also because it starts to segue a little bit away from just like landscape management, but into other aspects. And for example, home farming, um, composting, controlling the water in your house, in your land use, and in your house also, and the water runoff. And these are all things that we'll get into a little bit further down the road also, but this one is one that I like. And the designing and maintaining. And Diana and I think, are going to talk a little bit more about that. We've had some conversations about designing things that fit within your lifestyle and your ability to maintain it. And then definition 4, we see can be seen as a philosophy that encourages individuals and communities to live in harmony with nature, utilizing principles of ecological design to create sustainable solutions for food production, energy efficiency, and community development. And here, permaculture has to be embraced by the individual, but the individual needs to be able to exert influence over the community at large around them, to at least be able to show that what they're doing is something that other people can do too. And it doesn't need to mimic exactly like, if one person goes ahead and creates butterfly gardens, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to, but it may encourage other people to go into herb gardening or into, controlling their irrigation systems in their yard a little bit more vigorously with technology that comes out. It comes out in conversations that we as a community as a whole can have. And unfortunately, that seems to be something that's lacking in the greater ecological conversation that we have when we talk about global warming and other issues like this. People either don't want to talk about it or they feel bullied into it. Whereas here, by feeling that that this is something that you truly believe in, you can show the benefits for yourself and then share it with your community. Do you have anything to add, or do you think I'm off the mark there?
No, it's great. I love all the definitions, but I think whenever I read definition 4, that's kind of what resonated with me, was this culture piece. And maybe it's part of because it's in the word permaculture. So I think something I've found kind of interesting, and now what I'm attaching to, is the notion of permanent culture. So I know part of what permaculture stands for is permanent agriculture, or that's sometimes how it gets associated, which then also means permanent agriculture or polyculture. So that instead of monoculture, which is unfortunately still kind of the traditional agriculture processes we have now. But I do like the word permanent culture, and I think that's part of what this whole ethos is living sustainably and in a way that's regenerative and works with our natural resources and improves the environment around us. But it is very embracing of community and building something together.
Okay. So now we get to move on to my favorite subject, because I get to use my joke, right? Is what is not permaculture. So I had teased Diana that permaculture is not a bunch of men in the 70s hanging out trying to look like Greg Brady. So for the older amongst us, you'll understand what I'm saying. A true story here. Back in the early 80s, my mother tried to convince me to get a perm. I am glad that's one argument I was able to win against my mother, because I cannot imagine what my high school photos would have looked like had that happened. So what is not permaculture? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution or a rigid set of rules. It's a flexible framework that can be adapted to different climates, landscapes, and cultural contexts. And this kind of feeds back a little bit to what I'd said at the beginning when we were talking about what is permaculture. It's not strictly defined. It's not regulated. You can't go and get a degree, as far as I know. And I did look up just a couple of weeks ago, but that could have changed. But as of a couple of weeks ago, you cannot get a degree in permaculture. So it is, not a one size fits all. I think it's more a mindset than it is, something that's actively defined. It's not solely one thing. It's not solely focused on gardening nor on agriculture. While it encompasses sustainable farming practices, it also incorporates principles of community building, renewable energy, water management, and sustainable economic systems. It's not isolated. Permaculture is not about creating isolated, self-sufficient ecosystems. It recognizes the importance of interdependence, and it encourages collaboration and cooperation among individuals, communities, and ecosystems. And it's not a quick fix or a process. And I think this is very important to understand. And again, Diana and I will get into this a little bit more later on, but permaculture is not a quick fix or a shortcut to immediate results. Matter of fact, I would advocate against looking for immediate results. And again, we'll get into that. But basically, the short end is you don't know all the time what your actions can cause that you didn't expect. And when you are working with something like this, doing something hoping for a quick fix may lead to a quick disaster. So it's better sometimes to take things incrementally. It does require careful observation, thoughtful planning, and long-term commitment to regenerative practices and sustainable living. And now we're going to ask Diana to give us the permaculture tenets.
So we know all the different definitions, and then we also know what permaculture is not. So what are some kind of examples or principles you can walk away with and apply to your own situation to understand this a little bit better? So I did kind of grab some of this from in my research, really liked this one link, so I have it at the bottom. I kind of changed a couple of pieces here, but I want to give credit where credit is due, because I at first kind of confused permaculture with regenerative agriculture. It's like, are they the same thing? Definitely have learned that permaculture is definitely different, and it's just applying a philosophy and kind of core tenets, and feels more relatable to me, since I don't have a farm, at least not yet. So permaculture is more applicable, I think, to most situations that people are in. So some of these tenets, so observing and interacting with natural environmental systems. So really that goes back to kind of the not the quick fix and immediate results piece. It's taking time to observe your site, your landscape, where you are, and observing natural systems and patterns, to just understand how those things work in general, but then also in your unique environment. And the more we can mimic those patterns and how those things function, the better we're going to be able to integrate things into our environment, whether it be a new plant or an herb or whatever it is, whatever modification we're going to be making. The better we can understand the natural cycles of things and honor those things, the more likelihood we're going to influence things in a positive way. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I thank you. I would. So I have said a couple of times to Diana that we always need to be mindful of the law of unintended consequences. You can go and make a change in your landscape or in the architecture of your home and think that it's going to achieve one thing, and then come to find out that down the road it created something else. And I can give a very real world example of this. You decide that you want to be ecologically friendly, you want to be a little less on the grid, so you go and invest in solar panels. But when you talk to the solar company tells you, well, you got quite a few trees in your yard that would block the solar panels, we don't really think it would work. And then you opt to go ahead and trim back some of those trees, or maybe even remove them. And once you do that, now you've opened yourself up to be able to get a large number of hours on a good sunny day of sunlight onto those solar panels. So you're generating electricity. But what you may have failed to have thought about was the cooling benefits of that tree being over your house. And this, having lived in Florida, excuse me, is something that, I have seen happen when trees come down after hurricanes, and then suddenly people are like, oh my goodness, my electric bill this summer went up by 30% over what it's been the previous years. Well, sure, because you lost several trees. Well, the same thing I've seen happen with people that decide to prune back or remove trees so that they could get solar. And the unintended consequence is, yeah, they get the extra, they get to live off the grid a little bit by having solar power, and they're not paying that electric bill, but their power increases so much that they don't really see the benefit. So things sometimes have to be done incrementally or with a little bit of forward thinking about what will happen if I do this, because you reap one benefit, but you receive another one that you hadn't thought out.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good example, and it's definitely tricky when you're wanting to add structures or do things that have a level of permanence and require other things to either get out of the way or work with that thing. So it just takes at least thoughtfulness. Maybe in some situations it may work to do it that way, but it's just taking the time, I think, to observe it again and kind of interact with the systems. And I think this ties into with number 2. So just working with rather than against nature. It's like the best examples always are if there's like a river, like versus just kind of damming the water or moving it somewhere. It's like build a bridge, create ways to move water, make things work for you. I think it's very similar when it comes to landscapes as well, and where we're choosing to plant things, what we plant, so that everything kind of serve and work with each other. I think that ties in with number 3 too. Yeah, the learning and mimicking nature. Good.
Well, I was gonna, when you brought up the whole river thing, I would point out that the Army Corps of Engineers has been trying to manage the Mississippi River and the delta below it pretty much since the inception of the United States Army, pretty much to no avail. They build levees, the river decides to change course and direction. Well, I won't say direction, but at least the course. So, nature will always rule out. So it's best to watch nature and try and work with it as opposed to against it.
Yep. Yeah, and I feel like the learning from and mimicking nature piece too, it's like if it's in your own kind of yard, your own ecosystem, it is a bit of seeing what does work there and what doesn't. Of course, we want to introduce biodiversity. We want to bring different things in. We want to be able to produce food and things that we can be able to use. You just want to be able to see kind of what's already naturally working. The soil, shade, there's different variables that are going to affect what's maybe thriving versus what's not. So just continuing to kind of do that observing and kind of work with things versus trying to just force something that just might not be able to work. So moving on to number 4, so designing from patterns to details. And I'm going to talk about that later on when it comes to applying kind of like a roadmap to your own situation of what are the things to kind of consider and think through. So there is a patterns piece here, like a big picture vision of how do all these things kind of tie together at your location. But then the details matter too. So it's kind of knowing how to bounce back and forth between the bird and sky to the very kind of granular microscopic detail. And be able to doing that zooming in and out and honor all the elements of the system. So anything you want to add?
No, I think you're fine there.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Integrating rather than segregating. So this goes back to what permaculture is not. So I think the idea of kind of some things get grown here and placed here and they don't belong here. Permaculture is very much the opposite. It's about integrating things and finding value and having different things together. There's certainly things you can do to research of companion plantings and things like that, soil, like there are different variables you want to look at, but where you can kind of integrate different things, even if it's an edible garden, why can't that be integrated in with some other area? We don't have to have this kind of very compartmentalized locations. Those things can look nice, so to each their own. But I think this is about integrating aspects and different elements in a system rather than intentionally keeping them apart. There's more to gain by keeping things together.
Yes, I agree. And, I'd also like to point out, that integrating rather than segregating, hardscapes and your softscapes. So like your driveways and your sod, and people sometimes are very like defined as to what they want where. And it, you, you have to understand that each thing has its own effect on your property, and some of them can be detrimental and some of them can be positive, and finding a way to integrate them where they work closer together to maybe mitigate the bad. And I'll give a good example of this. Driveways, walkways, asphalt, pretty much any hard surface, either reflects sun back up into the atmosphere, or it, creates a large heat source on your property. These have the tendency to not just make you feel hot in the summer months, or to have that reflected and just make everything bad. They can leach out, radiate a little bit towards the landscape in your yard. They can dry out soils. They can make the water not retain as long because they're heating up. And recognizing that there's a cooling effect for grass, for example, that getting grass near an area with a slight break to allow to not destroy the grass when the driveways and stuff are heating up. So maybe a small mulch area, or something else that that is does not reflect that sunlight, and then moving into the sod can actually add a cooling effect, and so it can cool down, or mitigate that heat that's coming off a lot of your hard surfaces, as well as getting landscapes and things like that built into patios, so that you're getting those cooling effects. So integrating and not segregating, not saying all my plants are over here, all my hardscapes are over here, but trying to make everything work together. They can actually even things out a little bit more.
That's great. Using and valuing renewable resources. So things like integrating solar energy, that definitely is useful, especially for if we're using green equipment, battery-driven equipment, finding ways to just reduce our footprint, and noise and other things that are just kind of disrupt the environment. Finding ways to use renewable where we can, of course, compost, reduce waste, conserve resources. So, and I'll kind of mention the last two before we move on to the factors. So applying small and slow solutions. This goes back to the being methodical, introducing small changes, and then waiting and observing, especially when we're dealing with outdoor, spaces in nature and the environment. Things take time to take root, take time to have its impacts and kind of blend in and work in with the system, and the environment. So we need to give those things time, and it can take cycles. Soil can take years to be kind of modified and changed. So introducing small changes, things that we can then observe and see how they go, that's going to help us to be more successful, and create less waste if we're trying to do too many things at once, because that's really what this is about, is to kind of improve our footprint and our overall impact. And then the last one, philosophy that builds community and connection, which this definitely does and can bring people together. I think we can touch on that a little bit more when we talk about factors in a moment.
Yep. I agree.
Okay, switching over now to live. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. I think Dan is going to attempt to join as well, or add some commentary as we go. So permaculture factors. I'm sure many of these things will be kind of an overview, especially if you've been following Maria's different topics. I know there was invasive species, native plantings a couple months ago, butterfly gardens. So I definitely am not going to pretend to be experts in those areas since we already have great topics on them. But I do think this kind of ties all those elements together and all the other aspects of renewable energy and all the different topics we cover. I think permaculture does a great job at tying all these themes. So in addition to those tenets I had covered, and I'll share that slide a little bit later where it will overview the tenets alongside the factors. But here's kind of a list, and I like to use the word scorecard. I'm a fan of the LEED system, leadership in energy and environmental design. It's a green building certification standard. I like to think of being able to see things and then being able to go down the list and kind of check off, or at least weigh and see how well am I doing at this piece, or is this plan going to work if I'm balancing all these different kind of goals and objectives. So this kind of gives you that resource. And I'll touch on each of them a little bit because I definitely want the case studies and examples to illustrate each one. But for environment, we have ecosystem. So of course, we want to be supporting and enhancing the ecosystem that is around us. Biodiversity, we want to be increasing this as much as possible. Part of that is introducing new plants, of course, and different elements to enhance that. But it is also then decreasing, especially if there's invasive species, being methodical at removing those safely and properly, removing things that are not adding as much value to the ecosystem. Both of those approaches are going to increase biodiversity overall. And then site design is very important. And I think that does come into the planning piece and being able to see the big picture of how we're designing our entire site. Because, I won't say unfortunately, because it is good to have parameters around these things. Otherwise, it could be difficult to make decisions. But we do have constraints that we need to work within. So how is our site, our house, our backyard, how is it oriented? Is it north facing? Is it south facing? Are there large trees? Where are they? How much shading is that producing? Where are certain water features? How is water moving on the site? All of these different things you want to be able to map out and kind of see holistically. And that's going to help to make a plan that's going to allow you to work with what you have versus fighting against it. And that's going to increase success overall in the plan. So resources, of course, and this is resources for the plants and the life we're trying to create. Sun, of course, important. Soil. And there's a whole lot of factors that come into the soil, which again, we're not going to be able to cover every little detail of all these pieces, but trying to hit it with a broad stroke. So, soil, it's acidity, it's pH, it's density, it's makeup of soil. I can tell you my backyard, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. I have a ton of clay, and the previous owner owned a construction company. So there's all sorts of debris mixed into my soil. So it's just understanding what is actually going on beneath the surface, because we want to try and work with that where we can. But we need to understand if we're going to need to amend it or at times remove it. So knowing that is an essential piece of what's going to allow things to live and survive and thrive. Water, where is there water on your site? How is it moving? How much is retained? Your water table, all of those things, understanding how plants are getting that water. And as much as possible, of course, can we be harvesting water on site and moving it to where we need it? Can we plant things that maybe don't require as much water? We want to think through all those elements. And then nutrients as well. So plants need nutrients just like human beings need certain nutrients. So understanding what that makeup is in the soil, I believe there's 14 essential nutrients, but to name a few, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, the list goes on. being able to get things like soil tests to understand what's going on is going to help to understand how something is, how it's doing in your yard. And then it may help you to decide if you need to amend any soil, or maybe choosing plants that will do really well in that type of environment. So that's important as well. Climate. Dan, you want to?
If I could interrupt for a second, I'm okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could interrupt, when we're looking at those resources, I would also encourage people not just to look at it from the plant aspect, but how do those resources interact with the structures and the hardscapes around your property? Because when you're trying to consider, what do you have for the landscape, you also need to consider, how those things are affecting your hardscape. I mean, trees, I'd mentioned an example of that earlier. Water flow, when you have, a house as big as Meridian and then the Whitemeyer house next to it, you're talking about a lot of roof space that water's falling onto. It's not permeable. It's flowing off there into other areas. And so you want to consider, these things, not just for the plants, but also, how the buildings affect them and affect your ability to use them.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Keep jumping in, interrupt me as we go. I'm glad you're feeling better and can hop in. So moving on to climate. So carbon footprint, I think we all know what that means, but I'll rattle off kind of the list of things we want to be balancing when we're looking at honoring kind of permaculture and trying to create a self-sufficient system. So we want to be thinking about water. Are we needing to irrigate and move water? That, of course, is using an important resource, but it also will use electricity and energy in order to, if there's a pump action. Electricity, fossil fuels, pest management, all those things are, of course, using carbon, and we want to be mindful of that and use as much green equipment or self-propelled equipment as much as possible. I actually I'm a new homeowner, by the way. So I'm very much in this process of how am I going to improve the environment here and not get ahead of myself and be patient and kind of observe. But one of the first things I did purchase was the self-propelled, the reel mowers where you literally have to push it. So it's been a great workout. Definitely does not make you want to mow the lawn as often as I'm sure I would if I was using a battery powered, but it's been really great. It's been fun. It's quiet. But that's been a great way that I've been able to help kind of reduce the footprint here at my house. And then composting, of course. So we want to be reducing our waste and reusing that as much as we can. So having piles for food, but then also leaves, all those things can end up going back into the yard. It's also great for habitat. That's something I've been trying out because I'm right off of the woods. So just creating kind of this little loose pile. And I know some critters have kind of made it their home. So experimenting with different things like that have been pretty fun. Carbon sequestration. So ultimately, we're also trying to help, and we can through the landscape and sequestering carbon. I've been doing some reading and research on that, and Dan may even have some info on that. The grass, even though I think trees, of course, do a much greater job in the long run of sequestering carbon. We definitely don't want to diminish what grass is able to do. Like if grass is healthy and we have plants that are healthy, those also do that as well. So I do think some of this comes back to kind of what is the density of the plants we have in our location, as well as how are we maintaining it. So I know mowing frequently will reduce kind of the overall carbon that can be sequestered. But if there are areas of our yard, for example, that we already keep maybe a little bit more kind of casual and less maintained, those can be kind of more of your carbon sinks. And then you can have some other areas that are kind of higher maintained if you're going to be using them more or entertaining people there.
Right. And if I can hop in, if it's okay to hop in here, the tree versus sod question, circling back to that. A lot of people may not be aware that, healthy sod, 20 by 20 patch of it, about 400 square feet, produces as much oxygen back into the environment as one, standard tree. Now, I mean, there's some, slight variance depending on the tree. But if you've got healthy sod, there's a couple of things that it does do. It naturally will choke out the weeds. And to get healthy sod, one of the things you want to do is cut high. This was one of the first conversations that Diane and I had when we were at Meridian, because the sod at the time before we'd gotten there was being cut a little too low. You never want to take more than a third off a blade of grass. So regardless of how tall it is, at any given time, you want to cut no more than a third. This allows it to be mulched. It also allows the grass the ability to recover. So, learning, sod practices can be beneficial for your yard, because, like I said, they produce just as much oxygen as a tree, but they also have that cooling effect that I was talking about. And I think everybody can attest to this. If you go stand out in your yard on a really hot day, you definitely feel a lot cooler when you're in the lawn than you do pretty much anywhere else in your yard. If you're out in the garden, you're not getting that same cooling effect. So there is, a benefit to grass if properly maintained, as far as helping the environment.
It's great.
I'm passionate about grass.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. Food production, just a few examples there: edible gardens, herb gardens, beehives, because honey is certainly something that we can produce and consume. Some options for food production. I unfortunately don't have any pictures, but I'm always happy to share some resources afterwards. But creating a greenhouse, which may not always be feasible, but doing hoop houses, which is like a miniature version of a greenhouse, and very kind of simple, low to the ground way to do this too. So you have something throughout the year. So lots of different techniques out there for kind of maintaining gardens all year round. And I think tying back to the tenets piece where we talked about integrating versus segregating, having things more mixed together and looking at, of course, companion planting, things like that. So we're not putting something next to another thing that's going to cause it to fail. But the less we're kind of having, this section here is vegetables, this section here is, my butterfly garden. Having those things more interspersed is going to add better value and connection in the area that you're growing things in.
And, when you're limited by space, Diana, in a greenhouse or even the hoop gardening, is not something that you can do. I mean, I've advocated for a number of years, people returning to window boxes, for some of their landscaping, or building, small raised beds or tier raised beds that you can do your gardening in, that don't necessarily have the same cost or take up as much room as a greenhouse would in your yard. There's still creative ways that you can achieve the results that you're looking for. And so, I mean, but it comes back to, like you and I had spoken before, and I think we covered it in the earlier part of the video. What's your passion? If gardening for food is not your passion, well, then don't do it, because you're not going to enjoy it and you're not going to get the full benefit. But if it is, there's so many creative options out there that you can come up with, on your own, or ask ChatGPT.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a big fan of vertical gardens, vertical pallet gardens, and hydroponics. So I have a photo of vertical garden and a little bit pallet garden. So that's like a pretty affordable way as well. So I'm with you on the being tight on space and just being able to increase kind of what you can be growing and having on site. Well, it's good. You just touched on one of the things in the resources self list. So, I mean, the two quick ones, maintenance and economics. Maintenance, I think of labor, manpower. So whatever changes we're making and modifications, we need to be able to sustain it over time. And that means our actual physical being. Like, are we going to be able to upkeep with all the things we put in? We need to know that we'll be able to commit to that in the long run, and be able to sustain it. And I think putting things in that will be in a longer life cycle so that we're investing in that and it's going to stay, that's going to make it easier to maintain it in the long run. And then economics do come into play. And I think this goes back to the resources of the plan. So like there, and even our site design, that there's constraints, like economics is part of it. I would love to be doing a ton of things in my yard, but my wallet is certainly something I have to be balancing. So it just forces me to have to choose kind of what is the most important bang for the buck kind of investment I could be doing right now to improve the environment, but then also kind of bring passion and joy, which were kind of the next two. And I know we cover that a lot in these Maria sessions because it can be, I think it could just be disconcerting. Sometimes we feel like we're not doing enough. We want to be the best we can be at being kind of green stewards, and having no footprint. It's hard. So I think having passions, identifying those, and having joy, like those are the things that really do sustain you, and keep you excited, motivate you. And I listed passion and joy separately because joy to me, it makes you happy kind of in an instant moment. So an example I have is I'm a big soccer fan, and so is my family. My dog even loves playing soccer. So I would love my entire yard to be just filled with gardens. However, like I'm balancing it with the joy that playing soccer brings. So having a area of my yard that is suitable that we could play together there, like that's important, versus having every square inch of my yard a garden. Not really going to be ideal for maybe my family's lifestyle, and it's not going to bring us as much joy, which is definitely important. Dan, you have anything?
Yeah, I do. When it comes to the resources, I mean, I have a good example just for myself, covering both, all of the maintenance, the economics, the passion, and the joy. I have a passion for butterflies and bees. As a matter of fact, I'm extremely worried about the future of our bee communities around the world. I'm pretty sure everybody here is aware of the challenges that are facing them. I got into butterfly gardening at my house, and also as something that I pushed down in Florida with the business I had there, and I still push it up here for a couple of reasons. Butterfly gardening I found to be very low maintenance, which was ideal for me because at the height of the growing season with my business down in Florida, I would be maintaining or overseeing crews that were maintaining 131 properties every week on top of the construction projects that we were doing. And we're just as busy up here with Eden Design with the amount of stuff we're doing. My general rule of thumb was when I got home, I wasn't doing anything in my yard. So, but I liked butterfly gardening. I was passionate, like I said, about the bees. And I also I got a lot of joy from being able to create those environments and then watch my, at that time, 6-7-year-old daughter learn about butterflies and bees and even the hummingbirds that we started attracting. And because I was so passionate about it, I actually convinced several of my neighbors to start doing their own small butterfly gardens, depending on, what they could afford. And for some people, it was 5, 6, 7 plants, but it didn't matter because they were close enough to my property that it was almost like they were leading them into mine, which had a lot of stuff. And over time, throughout the entire development, we started seeing a lot more butterflies and different varieties of hummingbirds and bees making their home in our community. So, and from the economic standpoint, I really didn't have to buy those plants like out of pocket, because since I'd become so passionate about it and I had other customers asking me to do it or people reaching out to me and asking me to do it, I was consistently able to add to my garden as just a portion out of the proceeds of sales to other people. So it was very financially beneficial to me also. So that's my my story on.
No, it's great. I think it's a good segue into the community piece. Because I think permaculture is really, again, it's about creating habitats and ecosystems and communities that are self-sufficient, and they are integrated, and they're just increasing and building on that value. So I think we can all get kind of caught up a little bit in exactly what it is we are doing in our location. And we need to always then take a step back and remember the big picture, and remember that we have neighbors, we have ecosystems here, and ones we connect to, the more we can see how those come together and tie in with them versus trying to create our own kind of distinct single community. That's important. So I'm on an edge with woods, so tying in with that is important. And playing off of that. And like you had even mentioned, Dan, with your butterfly gardens, seeing what my neighbors are doing. And I live in Tacoma Park and in Maryland, and it's just a very green space, and very community oriented. So seeing what my neighbors are doing and working off of and playing off of what they're doing versus just always trying to replicate it or do my own thing, has been really eye-opening for me. And it's very different here. So I have a neighbor that has also then shared some plants with me, and, she's attracting so many things into her backyard. So it's just really, really special. And that collaborative piece is important. And it ends up really amplifying the effort because we're all kind of supporting each other, in our endeavors. So.
Yeah. And I think that community, part, we've got in Tacoma Park, as a matter of fact, we were brought in after two houses were built, one by mother and husband and wife, and then the other one built by their daughter and her husband. But each of them, had different things that they wanted in their yard and things that they wanted in their living spaces for it to do. But through working with them, we were able to find ways to integrate both their needs into each other, so that you're almost, as you're going from one yard to the other, it's transitional. It's not abrupt. And that is because, of course, they have a relationship with each other. But what's interesting is, the house behind them started integrating some of the landscape that we had on those two houses into theirs also, as they saw, how it started to mature. So, you can bring in community through conversations and through them observing, differences and appreciating, the change that you're bringing.
Yep. Yeah. And sharing resources.
Sharing resources. And I mean, it doesn't take like arm twisting, it just takes, hey, look at what these people did. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. Or, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if we could do that, and then just having conversations with people.
Diane, I saw you had some wonderful examples. I wonder if you could step into some of those and go through into your case studies a little bit.
Yep. Yeah. I was gonna say, I know people are probably dying to see some photos, so I'll move through this a little bit quicker. So that way we can open up for some questions. So this is the overview slide, what we just covered. So water, I think Dan and I are just really big on water management. It's just such an important part of creating a kind of healthy and resilient ecosystem. And if we're not managing it, it really can be destructive. Like, we need water, but it also can be destructive. So I don't want to waste too much time on Meridian, so I'll definitely speed through a couple of these. You can see on the left, I mean, this was months ago, but just drainage issues, and that just impacts the trees. It attracts mosquitoes. There's all sorts of issues. And those were things we were able to kind of look at the soil and excavate and regrade and change the topography of that area to move the water to where we needed it to go. And the picture on the right is from earlier in the slide.
And also clean out the existing drainage and add a little bit more drainage into that area. That was, drainage maintenance is something that people should be mindful of, because water is it brings life, but it's also can be quite destructive, as you'd said.
Yep. We can see before pictures on the left and then on the right. So muddy, I mean, all those things are unpleasant, but also not It's not sequestering carbon. It's attracting pests and other issues. It's making the walkway unstable. So things that we did that are shown on the right. So regrading, so changing the way the soil is leveled and telling the water where we want it to go. And then we did add French drains to then move the water to another spot that we needed it, so that we wouldn't then disrupt, and we could stabilize the pathway to make that more usable. And it's not technically impervious. It's just using, just building up the stone to make it level. And then since we have the French drain, it's helping to hold the pathway in place and not disrupting it, because the water is getting removed before it can really disrupt the pathway. I know Dan's always mentioned, and I think mulch sometimes can feel maybe like an extra, but mulch actually helps to conserve water. It helps to protect soil and retains moisture, which reduces the amount of watering that you need to do.
I don't know how familiar and people in the group are with mulch, but there's a lot of good benefits from it. 2 inches of mulch, right? You don't want to start going into 4 or 5 or 6. It doesn't work, but 2 to 3 inches of mulch can regulate the temperature of the soil. So when it's extremely cold outside, the soil under that mulch actually stays a little warmer, which is good for the roots of plants that are buried in there. So even if you lose the tops of your plants, chances are, you can bring your perennials back. Same thing during the heat of the summer when everything else is drying out, that mulch can cool it, keep everything cool under there, and it does trap the moisture in. So you can eliminate excess watering that's necessary during the heat. So mulch can be attractive, but it also does have very, very good benefits for people.
Great. Just want to keep going. This was a modification we did on the hillside, and really the example is kind of the rocks. I think it looks nice, but it's also just a way to, again, kind of guide the water to the right places and telling it where we want it to go. So I think it's a nice feature that could be added in gardens. These are just some examples of kind of French drain and just other ideas with water. So downspout extenders, getting the water away from somewhere, moving it to somewhere else, having outfalls. So having ways that water can move so it's not destructive and ruining an area. And then on the far right, just showing how pervious and impervious can kind of be together and in harmony.
Well, and if I can, because these are some examples from some work that we're doing. That far left picture is a gutter downspout. We moved the water away from going into what's going to be a flower bed here after we do the walkway to go underneath the walkway and out into the lawn, and had some emitters that we're installing out there so that the water works its way out into a swale naturally instead of flooding the landscape area. We're essentially doing a French drain in that second picture. On the third one, we have a large patio that we had built, and we need to be able to move that water that comes from the deck that we're building and from the patio that we're building and get it off there. But also we don't want it to just go flying into the neighbor's yard. So this is the beginning of, this is getting the water off the patio. We're going to build a system out from there that's going to take the water out to some landscaping in the backyard. And then that far right picture is actually, it kind of comes back to the raised bed gardening. This was all a giant slope in the back. Nothing would grow there because it's very shady. We were looking for ways to get things to grow, but also to keep the dirt from just washing down onto this walkway because it's an assisted living facility. And so it was a tripping hazard for the clients at our customer's place. So we went ahead and built up those beds. That was a couple of years ago. And then we go in and reinstall gardening every year. And it gives the residents something to do that are inclined to do it. And at the same time solves the erosion problems that are there.
Awesome. So wanted to just show kind of a picture here and a visual of the different ways we can kind of be big picture, kind of managing all these different elements, ultimately with the goal of all these things we want to be doing less, and then these are things we want to be doing kind of more of. And this was a picture of just a nearby property where I live. I just thought they did a nice job. And this was on a north-facing area where it's just a lot of kind of ground cover. There's a tree, but it's just kind of very minimal landscape, minimal need for kind of water there. So here's kind of some resources and kind of a roadmap, step-by-step kind of guide if when you want to apply these principles to your own place. This is how I have kind of approached it as I've learned it. And I'm always very kind of data-driven and plan-driven. So I'm hoping this can be helpful for folks that are wanting to apply this. So I've really liked this site. It's free. It's called findlotsize.com. And you can just enter your address and you basically can measure anything from area to distance of your lot or a roof area. It's non 3D, it's two-dimensional. You can take measurements here. I know Google Earth probably has something similar, but this is kind of very quick and is, I think, been a good resource I've always recommended to people. So what I would recommend, it's, you want to determine your lot size. If you don't know that, you want to know acreage, but also knowing square feet. And then once you have those measurements, being able to calculate and understand how much square feet is impervious. So how much surfaces are not going to allow water to move through it. So your roof is impervious unless you have a green roof, your driveway. So understanding what that square feet is important. And then knowing your pervious square feet. And then from there, you can kind of do a percentage. So even when you're developing a property, they always kind of look at percentages. So I think it just kind of gives you a sense of where you are. It gives you a barometer. 10 to 15% impervious of your square feet, your total square feet, is kind of that's like a good target. And obviously, if you can lessen that over time, that's kind of a good kind of baseline to start from. So this was something I had made and I could always share it, but creating your own sitemap, I'm a big fan of Excel. So this is actually something I've made and then been able to calculate. So giving actual kind of identities in a visual and a measurement of what is going on in my yard right now. What do I have growing? How much square feet is each thing using? What nutrients does it need? And then being able to map out from there. So I'll end up having kind of each of these things will have their own kind of list of like, what are the resources that this plant or tree kind of needs? And then I can also then map out kind of companion planting and be able to kind of flesh out, if I were to do this thing, what would be the domino effects of that decision? So this is kind of a tool that I've used and remembering kind of compass directions has helped. And then over time, because I've only been here for 6 months, but understanding kind of what do my neighbors have, so that again, it's kind of tying in that permanent culture piece. So that maybe I'm trying to do something different to attract or bring in a different species and kind of increase that biodiversity in a different way. So you can create your own sitemap. You certainly could sketch it. That would be a place you could start from. Understanding your baseline and collecting data. So that's that observing piece, and taking soil samples, I really always think is important to, again, understand what you're working with. Because you certainly can observe, and I've even made that mistake recently where I want to kind of rush to do something because I just want to feel like I'm taking action. So I end up buying something and I put it in and it dies. It's like, well, if I probably took a soil sample and I just understood, again, the just general kind of makeup of what I'm working with, and then I can make decisions so that I can set it up for success, that would have been probably the better way to go. Reviewing this kind of list and then identifying your resources and goals. So again, it's like we're always going to have constraints, but we're also going to have our own goals. So I think using that and then creating your own roadmap is important. So you know you're kind of chipping away at this, and you can also then identify other resources that can help you. So I'm a big fan of Gantt charts as being a project manager. So that was a resource. I'm actually doing this presentation in Canva. If you've not heard of Canva, it's wonderful. They have a free version. So if you ever wanted templates to kind of visualize things, it's a great kind of place to go. So I use Gantt charts just to, again, kind of visualize and understand what are my goals, and then I can chip away at it. It also allows you to then have a plan for when am I going to be maintaining these certain plants, or when am I going to install this other kind of new element. Having a plan and knowing how you're going to implement these things is important for creating and kind of honoring what permaculture stands for. Yeah, and so whatever you choose to focus on first, just diving deep into the learning and planning process is always a good way to go. That picture is an example of a companion planting chart that I've kind of made when I was planning out a garden. So I think understanding how these things relate to one another is important, and you can map that out in different ways and use that as a resource. Experiment with mobile and low maintenance solutions. So I mentioned the pallet garden, vertical pallet garden example on the left. On the right is mint that I had transplanted. So I had a ton of mint kind of overgrowing one area, and methodically kind of transplanted some of it to at least see how it would do, but then putting it in a pot and something I could then move around to different environments, but then be able to maintain it and contain it so it doesn't just take over. Those are always great ways to kind of try some things out and see what solutions work for you before doing a big investment and making a change to your environment. Experimenting with pocket areas and small pilot projects. So it's a rain garden image on the far left. Then this is some other things I've done in my yard of just trying things in a small area to see how it goes. So ferns are very resilient. That's what's there. There's more of the mint here. There's a very small rosemary plant that is not taking off, but we'll see. We'll give it time and weigh that out. And then over here, kind of creating, I want to eventually make this like a rain garden area to deal with some of the water runoff that happens here. And then, yeah, just more experimenting. So just corralling off an area. I'm a big birder and bird fan. So having a place that I know birds will be safe to kind of go to and occupy is important. So before installing or doing anything permanent, temporary fencing is just always kind of a great and affordable way to kind of test something out. So it's something I've been doing and trying to help the grass to kind of grow back in this area. Yeah, and more examples of that. So pollinator kind of garden over here. I don't have any pictures of butterflies in there, but they are there. And since this is like a raised bed, I can kind of try out and do some different things. I've seen a lot of pollinator gardens kind of lining walkways and driveways, which I think is definitely something I'm going to try because it looks beautiful, but then it's easy to kind of maintain and helps kind of navigating the heat island effect that you'll kind of get from impervious surfaces that are right next to it. Yeah, last piece of just embracing lifelong learning. There's just so much you can learn about these topics. You can dive in so deep into any one of these topics. You've kind of seen probably some of these slides I had on the others. Nigel Palmer was one of the instructors of a course I had took. So I took a class because I love nutrition and wellness and gardening and this kind of just holistic living piece. So I took a class called the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition. It's in Connecticut. I was commuting there for this class back when I lived in Pennsylvania, now in Maryland. But it was an awesome class. Doesn't mean you have to pay for things, but just knowing that there are resources out there and finding the free ones, talking with people, connecting. Certainly investing in a class can always be a great way to learn and dive into these kind of detailed pieces here.
Yeah, and if I could add to that,
yeah.
Another thing Diana and I were talking about last night when we finished recording, for centuries, there have been some really smart people that have recorded their observations and their experiments with plants, gardening, altering landscapes, structures against landscapes. And we are the benefactors of that knowledge, especially in today's day and age with technology. I understand, you can go on Google and you can find 1,000 things that are wrong, but you can also find 1,000 things that are based in the fact of the observations of people far smarter than me that had recorded their lifelong's work. So if you want to learn, my father always told me, he said, experience is what you gain from learning on your own. Wisdom is what you gain from learning from somebody else. So there's, the potential for wisdom out there when you just, dig into what other people have learned, and then you're able to apply it to today. And it doesn't cost you anything other than the resource of your time. So I'm a big advocate of that, studying and benefiting from other people's knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. I think we'll definitely get that in a moment when we open this up. I wanted to end this with kind of a gift from a neighbor. So my neighbor has an amazing garden. I have a couple of pictures in a second I'll show. I feel like she's kind of the pinnacle of permaculture, even when it comes to the sharing piece, because she gave me these two plants to kind of put in my garden. So it's just great to be sharing and not always feel like you just need to do it on your own, and it can be overwhelming. So it's great to have kind of that network and connection to kind of build permanent culture. So here's actually two pictures from her backyard. I didn't have a chance to drop more in, but she's got kind of every square inch of her garden kind of working for her, and it's like a bird sanctuary over there. So she's done a great job, and she's been a great inspiration to me. So yeah, and these are some of my kind of goals long-term: pervious pavers, rain barrel, eventually maybe piloting like a small green roof. But in the meantime, I'm just focused on observing and kind of seeing what's going to keep popping up and determine the best course of action. So yeah, but we definitely want to open up for questions, and appreciate everyone's patience in getting to pictures. Just didn't know how to drop it in earlier, but certainly hoping the information was engaging and that the pictures did end up helping. So yeah, open to questions now. Phil, do you want me to stop sharing my screen, or should I just keep
Sure.
this?
Yeah, that's fine. Let's do that. And Joe, do you want to bring us up to speed with any questions that have come in on the chat line?
Sure. One of the first questions I asked, and I got a number of great responses, was where would you get a soil test done? And I'm interested in Diana's and Dan's reply as well. One suggestion was you could contact your county extension office to help you get a universal report for a small fee. There are a number of other comments about, again, contacting the Penn State Extension in your area. Other states have extension services that likely can do the same for you. Specifically in Pennsylvania, they're available at the Penn State Extension offices for most counties for about $9, so you can't beat that. And someone provided a link to all the state cooperative extensions for which you can find where you could get your soil tested. So that I appreciate that information from the audience. And again, Dan and Diana, if you have any suggestions to add to that.
Yeah, I'll jump right in. I love university extensions down in Florida. They were one of the resources that I learned early on to go to ask questions, to take classes, to suggest classes to other people. The soil samples they'll take care of that. A lot of times, if you've got problems with your plants, maybe it's striations or a tree looks like it might be dying, taking samples into them. They're usually very, very good at being able to give you advice on what to do, even if that advice is, yeah, that tree's dead, you just need to get rid of it. So I think that the person that had suggested that, I'd seen that come across early on. I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful suggestion. You can buy soil sample kits for yourself and do them, but if you're not doing them regularly, you're probably not going to feel the confidence that would come from doing it. They say that they're simple. This is the voice of experience. I learned that they were not as simple as I thought they were going to be. So, go a professional lawn company, landscaping company, they can do it for you, or your extensions are really your best bet.
Anything to add to that, Diana?
Yeah, I mean, a trusted vendor, and I probably would end up calling Dan, I guess, or like a tree, if you have a tree vendor. So if you have a landscaping contractor you work with, they would have resources to do that. But yeah, I think it's just finding reputable kind of resource, or as Dan's, these other suggestions. Yeah, that works.
Thank you. Another comment from someone that they labeled all of their native plants in her pollinator garden, and her neighbors have taken photos, thanked me, and have taken cuttings that I offer. And this has opened up so many conversations. And I think it gets to a number of points during Dan and Diana's presentation about opening it up to the community and talking to your neighbor about the environment, about what you're doing, about what they want to do, etc. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
We have another chat. Go ahead, Phil. Were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, when it comes to, building community, almost any type of conversation that you're having with people, right? I've got a lot of sales experience having a business. There's the hard sell and then there's the soft sell. And the soft sell is, hey, this is what I'm doing. What are you doing? And it's a conversation, and you find if there's something that you guys share in common. Well, basically, we're doing the same thing when we're trying to show other people the benefits of the type of gardening and the type of permaculture, that we're trying to create. It's not a hard sell. It's not, hey, you need to do this, or here's what the benefits are. It's, hey, Dan, what are you doing? Oh, well, I got a butterfly garden so that my daughter and I could, talk about the different types of animals and insects, and I'd have a nice place to just kind of chill at. And, that type conversation, like this person had commented that, they open the floor. That's always the best way, I feel, to get people to see your way of thinking, is just conversational give and take. And so I would encourage that, if you're a believer in this type of program, just, soft sell it. Just talk about it as, how it applies to you and what benefits it gives you.
Thank you.
If I'm talking too much, tell me to stop. I might be
not at all. Not at all. Good comments. Thank you. Another in the chat is that we have had success with 4 55-gallon rain barrels, and they're looking for your thoughts. There's one comment right after that that says avoid plastic barrels and PVC. They recommend use retired wine barrels or recycled copper pipes as being ideal. So your comments to those.
Do you want me to field that, Diana, since we talked about
go ahead.
that?
Yep.
Oh, I got in all sorts of trouble like you would not believe down in Florida, because I thought, hey, I'm going to capture the rainwater coming off my property. I'm going to tie it into my irrigation system so that I'm not drawn off the well as much as I am when I need to water. And unfortunately, I fell afoul of the governing authority because I hadn't permitted it. And it was something that they really weren't keen on. And this is going back probably 18, 19 years ago. And so my advice to people, and I'd hope that something like this would come up so that we could discuss it. you want to make sure you're not running afoul of your governing authority. Your governing authorities sometimes are behind the times. They don't recognize in so many different ways that practices that we can do can be beneficial and not harmful. The reason that I was getting in trouble is they were afraid that I was going to have standing water. I was going to attract insects. We were dealing with a Zika problem in Florida at the time. So that was a legitimate concern on their part, but there was a far better way for them to be able to handle it. And my experience has been, I've seen it with solar. I've seen it with the rain barrels, like I talked about. I've seen it with people going to having chicken coops in their yard. The government is always behind the times. And one of the things that we as a community can do is get together people that are like-minded and go to them and explain to the people on the city commissions or the county commissions why this is beneficial and why they need to change their thinking. Because the people in zoning, it's not like they're just deciding to create problems. They got set rules, they got to follow them. It's the commissions that need to be educated by us, the people that have educated ourselves. So I think that the rain barrel thing, like I said, it was a wonderful idea. We're doing something quite similar to it at the farm where the business is located, because we water a lot of landscape, and we intend on increasing the amount of plants that we keep with greenhouses and stuff. So we're looking for ecologically friendly ways to care for them without having to draw off the well water or city water. So it's a really great idea. Just make sure that you're not ticking off the wrong people.
Good suggestion. Does anyone have, also in the chat, does anyone have suggestions for companion planting information? Someone else did provide a link, which I didn't look at, but I assume that's a good route to go. But any suggestions on that, companion planting?
Yeah, I think it's just Googling it. So it's whatever you're looking to kind of grow. Just Google, then seeing if a couple of resources kind of seem to match up. You could get kind of bad information somewhere, but I think if you see it consistent in a couple of different places, then yeah. I think it's just starting. I feel like at times it's starting with one plant. And that's probably the way I did it. Like start with the one plant, mapping out what goes well with it, what doesn't go well with it, and then going to the next one. And then that's how you can start to kind of chart out where you would need to place things to help each other and not kind of hurt anything. So Dan, maybe you have a better answer than that.
Well, I was going to say Googling it is good. There's almanac websites out there that have that information. Or, if you want to go old school and buy some old almanacs also. But again, back to what I'd said, we've got centuries worth of knowledge that people have distilled down that will help us know what works with what. What's good to, you grow this at this time of year, you can grow that at that time of year. There's lots of resources out there that provide those answers and the knowledge but almanacs are what I would suggest. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you, sir.
Oh, no problem. I did have a question. Do you have a favorite plant for attracting butterflies? Favorite flower in particular?
Yeah. Oh boy, I dropped my phone. So yes, the first thing that I'd say anybody needs is milkweed, and I really like to attract the monarch butterflies. So you want milkweed that's specific to them. Down in Florida, one of my favorites was the firebush, which actually comes from Texas because it was very vibrant. And Buddleia, I think, is an elegant plant that's called the butterfly bush by a lot of people. I like the color of it. And then also, oh, goodness gracious. I'm sorry. It starts with a G, and for Gora, which is a low-lying plant. Has very delicate flowers on it. I like that also.
Gora?
Gora. G as in golf, A-U-R-A. And then Budleia is B as in Bravo, U-D-D-L-E-I-A. And that has a conical purple flower on it, which, like I said, I think is just absolutely gorgeous. But that's my taste, right? Everybody's going to have their own taste as to what they think is,
Sure.
nice. And of course, the nice thing about a butterfly garden is your goal is texture, right? Texture and color. So somewheres, you have tall plants, you've got short plants, you've got spreading plants, you've got, climbing plants, and you're mixing all these things together. And it just, to me, I find it very relaxing, as opposed to what I call the Germanic style of landscaping, where everything's in a line and it all matches. I'm not a big fan of that.
Okay, thank you. Two additional comments came in on the chat. One noted that the Budleia is now classified as an invasive species in Pennsylvania.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So sorry to burst the bubble there.
Well, that's my thing to learn today, right? Every day I try and learn something. So
Yeah.
now I know that.
Thanks,
and then the suggestions on the best way to get rid of multiflora rose, and maybe since I don't know what that is, if you could explain that as well.
I'm Googling it right now. So I'm looking up.
Or if Kay, if you have can give us an idea of what that is, if you don't mind sharing with that.
Well, it's an invasive species. It's all over my yard, and it just crowds everything else out. And it's just something that I want to get rid of, but it has very persistent roots. So, and it's not native.
I mean, it sounds like a nice plant, but names are deceiving.
It smells good.
I'm sorry, we've got a bad connection, I think.
When it's in bloom, but
Okay, well, we can move on then. Maybe one other comment while we're waiting for any others is that the USDA plants website can tell you if your plant is native to your county. So that might be a good place to go if you're looking to see what's native to your part of your neck of the woods, so to speak, by looking under the USDA plants website. And then we do have a suggestion on how to get rid of multiflora rose is to cut the stem near the ground and then immediately apply, not that I can recommend that, but immediately apply concentrated Roundup on the cut stem or some other organic deterrent, shall I say.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I guess even many of our local environmental groups use the Roundup but they apply it to stems, not a general application. They're trying to do with be specific, but it's discouraging that we don't seem to have a lot of options in that direction other than mechanical weeding and staying after stuff. We're not planting it in the first place if you can, but usually we don't have that option available to us. And I think
if I may, just so I'm not a big proponent of Roundup or other, glyphosate-based products, where, if you can avoid it. But when you're dealing with an invasive species, really, what is, you've got to be able to dedicate the time them out roots and then following up immediately after and immediately after and immediately.
Okay, well, Phil, I think that
Pardon?
Yeah, we lost the last part of your description, but I think it sounded like you were saying you just need to be very diligent with it and get the roots out and then keep getting them out. Was that correct?
I think we lost Dan.
Oh.
Oh dear.
I mean, my conversations with Dan, I know it's like sometimes it's just kind of called for. So I do think for each of these different invasive species are going to have different recommended approaches. So I think if it's localized and it's focused in one spot, it's not going to kind of have an effect and kind of trickle out from there and impact other areas. So I think if it's the right amount, which there's definitely, I'm sure, instructions on how much to apply. So yeah, that might be what you need to do.
Well, I think go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry, Phil. I was just going to say, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it in the chat. So thank you everyone for your comments, your suggestions. Very helpful.
Yes, we appreciate everybody's participation in this, and best wishes for your own gardening, and lots of wonderful principles and important things to consider. Diana brought up through her presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of the macro world of what the IRA, meaning the Inflation Reduction Act, poorly named to refer to addressing climate change, which is really the important thing there. See what it's doing, what the challenges are for that. We'll see you next month. But plan for hopefully our in-person in September, and we'd like to get back together and start physically connecting with the world every once in a while. But thank you everybody for joining us this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month, last Tuesday of July. I'll look for the Maria website to see information for registration. Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.